We'd like to hear the applicant's testimony at this point, but I'd also like to... I did. We'd like to hear the applicant's testimony at this point, but I'd also like to say if you'd like to take your jackets off at this point, counsel and professionals, you're more than welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kelso.
Yes, members of the board, once again, Thomas Kelso on behalf of the applicant Construction Management Associates. We're before you this evening seeking your approval for preliminary and final site plan and variance approvals for the construction of a 4-story residential building containing a total of 52 housing units and common lobby and lounge areas. The housing units will be located on all floors and consist of 11 studio apartments, 27 one-bedroom and 14 two-bedroom units. The first floor of the building is to be dedicated for New Brunswick Theological Seminary housing. There's also proposed an underground parking structure, which is proposed to include 43 parking spaces. And as I've indicated to you previously, the applicant is the designated redeveloper for the property, which is located within the College Avenue redevelopment area. The proposed use is in conformance with the College Avenue redevelopment plan. The property is located at 17 Mine Street and it's designated as Block 71, Lot 401 on New Brunswick tax map. There is one variance that is being requested for this project. All of the balance of the requirements are being met. The variance is for parking to permit 43 parking spaces, whereas a minimum of 96 spaces are required under RSIS standards. It's my intent to call my client for testimony, our architect, our civil engineer, our traffic consultant, and our professional planner for testimony. With that as background, at this time I will call for testimony first, Mr. Mitchell Broder. Go ahead. Logistics. You can come out here. Mr. Broder, you are the...
Mr. Broder, can you raise your right hand, state your name, spell your last name for me, please?
Mitchell Broder, B-R-O-D-E-R.
And do you swear to the truth in this, whole truth in this matter?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Broder, you are a principal of Construction Management Associates, the applicant here this evening, is that correct?
That is correct.
And in that capacity, you are familiar with all aspects of what's before the board this evening, the process in which you were designated as redeveloper, the design, development, and planning for the project, as well as the overall intent of what the project was for.
Yes, I do.
Then, if you could please, I think it would be helpful for the board to hear from you, as the principal of the applicant, your vision for the project, a little background with respect to how you see the project, if it's approved, being developed, and again, give us just a general overview and a feel for the building if it's complete.
Okay, thank you, Tom, and good evening, members of the board. Our firm has successfully been redeveloping and operating properties throughout the city for the past 20 years. Last December, the Housing Authority approved our qualifications to be named as the developer for the Mine Street component of the larger College Avenue redevelopment plan. This state-of-the-art project was designed to serve as replacement housing for the New Brunswick Theological Seminary, along with open market apartments. The seminary will have exclusive use of the first 10 apartments on the first floor, while the 42 units above would be available to the open market. Tonight, we will be presenting to you a revised version of the plan which we first presented to this board 7 months ago. These spacious apartments will feature many of the amenities that are expected in today's marketplace, but are unfortunately severely lacking in New Brunswick. Features include a modern bath and kitchen with stainless steel appliance package, natural stone countertops, state-of-the-art sprinkler and fire safety systems, security cameras, detailed molding work, and abundant closet space, among other amenities. Common areas will feature professionally decorated spaces, elevator, convenient trash disposal via garbage chute, 1,300 square feet of outdoor spaces, lounge areas, laundry facilities on each floor, garage parking, and the most current electronic security and access features. The proposed site improvements will feature a concealed garage with parking for 43 vehicles. Garage parking of this nature provides for safety and comfort while eliminating unsightly surface parking. The proposed parking space to unit ratio is similar to the ratio which we have built into all of our projects which we have completed within the city. Our 20 years of experience has proven that these parking ratios work well. Historically, both our unit occupancy rate and the parking demand have averaged close to 95%. Simply put, we have found the sweet spot in the unit to parking mix. Mass transit, proximity to campus, bicycle facilities, the expense of maintaining a vehicle in town, innovative concepts like enterprise car share, and ride service apps such as Uber are all working together to reduce the need for residents to own and maintain a vehicle in New Brunswick. This will particularly be the case for Rutgers and seminary students at the Mine Street location. Being just 300 feet to College Avenue, this site is virtually in the epicenter of the Rutgers campus. As we have done with our other projects, we are proposing to forfeit the right to off-street parking for this location. The open market, however, will ultimately dictate those residents who will choose to reside at this location, knowing the availability of parking. As with our other properties, parking will be controlled with hang tags and monitored by our contracted towing service. Site improvements will also include a fully engineered stormwater management system, new curbing, sidewalks, exterior lighting, fencing, and landscaping. Additionally, we are proposing significant upgrades to the city's stormwater and domestic water systems on Mine Street. This will benefit all of Mine Street. Concealed garbage and recycling facilities with the use of private waste hauling will eliminate the need to leave unsightly garbage cans on the curb for collection. Although our original application for this project was presented to you 7 months ago, we are here tonight to offer significant changes which we have made to the plan. These changes are in direct response to the concerns that were voiced during the public portion of the previous meetings. While our professionals will elaborate, I would like to touch upon the 5 concrete steps which we have taken since our initial hearing. Number 1, we have completely redesigned the building facade by changing the modern style to a traditional residential design. Colonial brick, shaking clapboard siding, along with double hung windows are simple but attractive residential finishes that have been introduced into the new building design. A-frame dormers, mansard roofing, dental moldings, and the front entrance porch all help to tie this building into the immediate neighborhood. Number 2, we have lowered the front of the building from 4 to 3 stories. The new front roof line will now tie in with the height of the neighboring homes. This change has been made even though at 4 stories, the original building was within zoning compliance for height. Number 3, by stepping back both front corners, we have softened the feel of the building and have eliminated the transformer variance. With this change, we are now seeking only 1 parking variance for the project. All other aspects of this building are compliant with zoning and are in the spirit of the College Avenue redevelopment plan. Number 4, we have removed 5 apartments from the original plan, which in turn will reduce the overall occupancy as well as the requested parking variance. Again, this is a change that is being made even though the floor area ratio of the original building was in full compliance. Number 5, we have reached an agreement with Enterprise Car Rental to provide a car share vehicle at this location. Car sharing is an innovative concept which is now taking root in many cities that allows for short-term and hourly usage of a vehicle. The first car share vehicles were introduced to downtown New Brunswick only a few months ago. Having multiple locations within the city to access car share vehicles makes this concept that much more viable for the residents of this building. We will also be offering to pay the Enterprise Car Share membership dues for all residents of this building who do not bring a vehicle to New Brunswick. The model of progress and growth that the city has embraced for decades does not come easy, and it is invariably difficult to please all the people all the time. Our significant redesign of the building, the elimination and reduction of the requested variances, the introduction of an on-site car share vehicle program, and our proven track record all validate our commitment to quality, practical development, while employing creative solutions to issues of concern. DevCo and the New Brunswick Theological Seminary chose to partner with us on this project because of our expertise in development of this caliber. Equally as important, they recognize that our property management operation is arguably the most highly regarded of its kind within the city. With daily cleaning and maintenance to yearly capital improvements at all of our locations, our day-to-day operations speak for themselves. Post-development, our property management regimen will raise the bar on Mine Street. One only needs to look around the corner to that which we have accomplished on Union Street over the past 20 years. Also, under our ownership, this building will generate close to $130,000 in yearly tax revenues to the city. While under the ownership of the university, this property was tax exempt, and the vacant houses remain an eyesore to this day. Significant revenue for the city, important union construction jobs, modern and safe new housing, improving the city and fulfillment of the College Avenue redevelopment plan all justify the merits of this project. We greatly appreciate the work that the city and this board has done to make New Brunswick a true success story, and we are proud to play our part in this process. We look forward to your continued support of our efforts and this very appropriate improvement to the College Avenue area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mitch. I have no questions for Mr. Broder if the board wishes to direct anything at this point.
Does the board have any questions? No, not at this time.
All right, thank you. At this time, I will call Mr. Stephen Schock for testimony.
Raise your right hand and state your name, spell your last name, please.
Stephen Schock, S-C-H-O-C-H.
And do you swear to hold this matter?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Schock, you are a licensed professional architect in the state of New Jersey, is that correct?
That's correct.
And in that capacity, you are familiar with the overall project that's being presented to the board this evening, but particularly with the architectural detail and development of the building itself, is that correct?
That is also correct.
Could you give the board then the benefit of your professional qualifications and experience?
Please testify before the board and please set this.
Madam Chair, I would prefer if he put his credentials on the record. There is a transcript being made, and with with objectors, I think a record is probably needed to be complete in this case.
Briefly then, I'm a licensed architect in the state of New Jersey and have been since 1987. I'm also effectively licensed in 16 other states in the U.S., all in good standing. I also have a license which is considered NCARB qualified, which gives me the opportunity to practice throughout the state of the country upon request. I'm a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University with a Bachelor of Architecture. I'm the managing principal of Kitchen and Associate Services, Inc., a 72-person full-service architecture, engineering, interior and planning firm located in Camden County, the borough of Collingswood, New Jersey. I've had occasion to present before this board many times and have over 10 buildings that we have designed and successfully implemented here in the city of New Brunswick.
Once again, I would offer Mr. Schock as a professional, licensed and authorized to provide professional testimony.
Accepted.
Thank you.
Mr. Schock, if you could then, I'm going to ask you to generally go through the overview of the program that you have. Feel free to use exhibits. I understand that the big board exhibits that you have, we have reduced to manageable.
Several of them are in smaller versions for members of the board.
And I will give these to board members as well, I'll give you a copy and then we'll be presenting. Give me just one more. I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
And the easels are positioned this way so that hopefully members of the public can at least position themselves to also see the exhibits.
You may proceed. We're going to be handing those out to the board members.
Again, very briefly, just to familiarize everybody with the site and the location. The property is on Mine Street, as has been.
Yeah, Mr. Sharp, if we could just mark that as A1 with today's date,
A1.
and we could identify it also.
This is an aerial view, an aerial photograph of the neighborhood vicinity. The parcel in question is outlined in a yellow dotted line. It represents the consolidation of several parcels at address 17 to 23 Mine Street. And you can see towards the right side of the image, about 300 feet away, as has been previously mentioned, is College Avenue and the heart of the Rutgers campus. Marking exhibit A2, which is called Neighborhood Properties. These are two photographs side by side in approximate relationship to one another, representing the property in question. The left photograph the smaller building with what's referred to as a mansard roof and two dormers. That is one of the buildings that's going to be taken down. Then there is a vacant area in between that and the blue building, which is 17 Mine Street. That building also will be taken down in the process of clearing the land for the project site. You can see in both of these photographs the two immediately adjacent properties that will remain. Also, simply to give members of the board, and this will be marked A3. This is 6 photographs of neighborhood properties, all located on Mine Street within approximate 2-block area. Just to give a sense of the types of buildings that are on Mine Street, you have buildings going up to the corner of Easton Avenue, where you start seeing some of the more commercial uses in some of the properties.
Excuse me, 1 second, I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry to disturb you, but nobody can see here.
We can't
Can you rotate it or
Yeah, I mean, we have.
Because they have.
Yeah, we have those, so-
Although I don't know if every one of those exhibits is there, but.
Look at that.
Thank you.
These are simply photographs of several of the properties on Mine Street, one of which in the lower right has been is clearly marked as a fraternity house. Many of these properties have been converted legally for multi-tenant occupancy for student housing. The building in question and what some of the context and the reason why this is important is because there's been discussion over the aesthetics of the proposed building and how it will relate to some of the building elements and existing design vocabulary that exists along Mine Street. Mark this one, what are we up to? 4. A4 is not on in your handouts. So But basically, this is the site plan prepared by Grotto Engineering, and they'll testify later to the engineering components of the plan. But effectively, all the land in those two parcels has been consolidated for a single building to be constructed on consolidated land. And as you can see by the footprint, it's a substantial footprint of a building that comes very close to the sides and the rear and the front property lines. All of those setbacks, what I want to point out is all of those setbacks are in conformance with the bulk standards set forth in the redevelopment plan. As Mr. Broder mentioned, one of the things that we're coming back with today, or we're here to say today, is not just that this project is a good project on its merits, but also that the applicant has listened to some of the commentary that has preceded this. And while this is an application, that context is a relevant thing to consider. The building being put forth today has fewer units. It's got a smaller area. The massing, the treatment of the mass of the building itself, as you'll see, has been manipulated in such a way to respond and give us the opportunity to really change the architectural vocabulary of the building. I'm going to mark this one A5. And at the same time, I'm going to put up A6.
Both of those are in your,
Excuse me?
they're both in.
Both of these are in your packets. These are renderings of view 1. My boards are for sequence. There we go. This one's A6.
Yeah.
These are renderings of view 1. This is a rendering of the view of the building from Main Street. If you're standing on the, I believe it's a southerly portion that is closest to Easton Avenue. The reason I'm showing 2 is to illustrate the impact of the reduction of the massing at the 4th floor and the introduction of the architectural elements. Because in the prior application, we totally filled out the available FAR and the available bulk. There was very little opportunity to create an architecture that was residential in scale and style. So contemporary architecture was the direction that we took for that. In response to a lot of what we heard was it didn't fit in aesthetically. One of the things that the applicant had instructed us to do is to go back and look where could we maximize the opportunity to make aesthetic improvements that would be more contextual and compatible with some of the architecture that's in the area. The clear thing there is to be able to seriously drop the mass of the building from 4 stories to 3 stories as it's perceived from Main Street. As you can see, this is still a 4-story building, but that 4th story is set back. It's completely void for more than 20 feet along the entire frontage of Main Street. What that does is it allows an architecture to come forward that is much more in keeping with the 2.5 to 3-story scale and massing of other buildings that exist right now on Main Street. In addition to dropping the top floor down, both of the 2 corners have been set back farther and softened. In one side, on the northern side, that is a porch element, which is also a very contextual element in the area. And on the southerly side, that corner is intentionally set back so that the electrical transformer can be moved out of the front yard setback and placed within that screened area that you see in the near corner of the rendering. What we're doing here is we're incorporating several things. The architectural references that we're pulling out have to deal with a mix of the colonial style brick, the horizontal siding, the use of shade clapboard, even the use of some mansard roofing with twin dormers. If you recall Exhibit A2. Exhibit A2 has a building that exists right now that will be demolished for this, but part of the architecture there, that is where we're drawing some of those design references for, which is a mansard roof with a pair of twin dormers. I'll put up now exhibits A7 and A8, which are also the current proposed design and the old design as well. They're noted as view 2.
Just for clarification, A7 will be what's proposed.
A7 is what is proposed now. A8 is simply for context referencing the previously submitted building. And this is a view from the other angle, closer to College Avenue, looking back, where in the foreground you see the recessed porch in one of the entrances. You also see the entrance area to the garage underneath. Again, what you're seeing in terms of the facade is an intentional treatment of materials to create different segments along the front of the building so that it does not appear as a boring, repetitious type of facade on a building, but instead evokes the imagery of multiple townhomes or residences set next to each other. For the benefit of the seminarians, the first floor has a central entrance about in the middle of the building, whereas there's also a secondary entrance that's actually closer to the elevator shaft for those residents that are up on the upper floors. Presumably will be using the elevator. The elevator services all floors. The seminarians could certainly use that as well. And the elevator goes down into the parking garage. So the entire building is handicapped accessible / adaptable. Some of the units will be fit out from an initial build out for accessibility for the codes and regulations. But all of the units will have the necessary clearances and door widths and things like that so that mobility impairments can easily be dealt with. In addition to the material and stepping on the front, one of the other things that has remained from the prior application is both of the sides of the buildings. The building itself in plan is shaped kind of like an H, with one long vertical stroke along Mine Street, another along the back. And then there are two courtyards that face either side. In addition, the fourth floor in the back also retreats in from both of those sides. This does several things. One, it provides more perimeter skin for light and views, which is something that you want to enhance in a residential setting. But also by cutting away from the allowable mass of the building at the edges and sides, it minimizes any kind of shadow that the building will cast throughout the year. It is still a 4-story building. It's going to cast some shadow, but by choosing to have these side courtyards, by choosing to retreat back on the 4th floor towards the rear, it minimizes the impact on the adjacent properties. As has been stated before, each floor has certain amenities. These are all private, fully functioning apartments with their own bathrooms, kitchens, living areas, and bedrooms. The building itself, of the 52 units, 11 of them are studio apartments, 27 are 1-bedroom apartments, and 14 are 2-bedroom apartments. In addition to lowering the mass, the result of that is, compared to the prior application, the overall area has dropped from close to 54,000 to just over 52,600 square feet. So there's been a significant reduction in terms of square footage and in terms of number of bedrooms and number of units. One of the comments on the planner's report letter had to do with how trash is handled. There's a trash room on each floor. There's a trash chute. So residents take their trash to a trash chute, goes down, and there is a collection area on the ground floor. That is what is served on, again, referencing A7, you can see it fairly clearly. Looks like a garage door, a fairly standard residential garage door. That is concealing the internal storage area collection treatment for the trash. There's a compactor in there. And the trash will remain inside, out of view, until private pickup comes, at which point it gets moved out. So that trash door is actually sharing an extended curb cut with the driveway entrance. So all vehicular traffic and service to the building is consolidated in the one spot. The parking in the basement, as others will be elaborating specifically on parking variance, but it remains at 43 cars because that's the maximum that can be fit on the footprint of the building. It is a non-gated garage entrance, which is very typical of these types of buildings in the city, and I believe it's typical of every property that the applicant manages. And just by virtue of simple math, by reducing the number of units and maintaining the same amount of cars, the requested parking variance is lessened. The building is fully fire suppressed, and there will be on-site security cameras monitoring both of the entrances and the garage and any of the common spaces. I do want to comment, conclude the architectural testimony by commenting on the appropriateness of the proposed building in connection to the College Avenue, the design guidelines set forth in the College Avenue redevelopment plan. And for that, I'm going to put up both the two ranges side by side. So A5 and A7 are the two that are currently on display. As has been stated, the building itself, in terms of its bulk standards, is in 100% compliance with the bulk standards of the Area 2. So we're not looking for any kind of height variance or setback variances or any other kinds of variances related to the bulk of the building. Many of the prior comments had to do with the contemporary aesthetic and whether or not that was in keeping with some of the language of the redevelopment plan for a harmonious treatment or something that is compatible with the existing. Specifically in the general provisions of the design guidelines, in 1A it states, while proposed buildings, the proposed development permitted is of a higher density than is characteristic of the buildings currently on the campus. The new development should seek to be compatible and supportive of the design elements of older buildings located on Old Queens campus and Voorhees Mall, and to establish a strong design character for College Avenue between Stone and Vine Streets and Hamilton Street, particularly at the street level and at building levels that pedestrians experience from the sidewalk. All new buildings should be related harmoniously to the terrain and to existing buildings and other substantial structures in the vicinity that have a visual relationship to the proposed building or buildings. That is a quote from Part 1A of the general provisions of the design guidelines. There are a couple things in that text that really have to be understood. Number one is that there's a clear understanding, a clear intention that greater intensity of development is intended for this property. It's not supposed to be a number of small homes any longer. Bigger than what's there now is fundamentally intended by the language of the redevelopment plan. In order for bigger buildings, they can be compatible and supported by incorporating familiar design elements. They don't have to emulate the existing buildings, but by referencing and bringing in familiar design elements, that is set forth as one of the criteria, one of the tests as to whether or not a design is considered to be compatible. We've already talked about materials, fenestrations, textures, colors, forms. All of those things work together, and all those things are being drawn from local references in order to achieve that kind of compatibility. There's also in that text a clear priority placed on the pedestrian experience. Not that there's any unimportant side to any building, but clearly the intention of the design guidelines is to make the experience from the street what is the primary test of whether or not proposed building is compatible or not. That's because the street presence really dominates people's perceptions. So in these renderings, though it's a 4-story building, the amount of pushback on that 4th floor has been, as is shown in both renderings, has been specifically looked at so that if you're standing on the sidewalk across Mine Street, can you not see the 4th floor entirely? No, but you can see a hint of the 4th floor. That 4th floor no longer dominates the street experience. And clearly the priority placed on the street experience is of the paramount intent of the design guidelines. In addition to those general guidelines, there are other aspects of the design guidelines that are set forth in the plan that the current project really responds to. In 1B, quote, "Step designs may be appropriate to preserve light, views, and to reinforce the scale of a particular site or assemblage of lots." Step designs, that's exactly and fundamentally where we've taken what little kind of shrinkage we've gotten. We've used that to its maximum potential to create step designs to achieve that intent of the plan. In 1C, the selection of building design elements, for example, in the use of materials, fenestration, color, texture, etc., should ensure that such treatment is harmonious with that prevalent in the area where such prevalence exists. Again, it's a nod to existing material types and fenestrations. These are all things that are set forth in the plan as tests of whether it's an appropriate design. But beyond the general standards, the general guidelines, there's also a set of specific design guidelines. And we believe that that many of the specific guidelines are also embodied in this. The specific guidelines clearly focus attention to the facade of the block as the base element that the design guidelines seek to address. 2A suggests, quote, "Large horizontal buildings of limited height should be broken down into segments having vertical orientation, bays, repetition of bays, and traditional facade elements create patterns which help establish a sense of scale." Again, the bays, the breaking down of the facade into various vertical elements achieves exactly that specific design guideline. And 2C suggests buildings should be designed to be wall dominated and that the roofs are visually less dominant in the total design. Roof form should be similar to those predominantly found on adjacent buildings. Again, the strong cornice lines, the introduction of some mansard roofs, and dormer and such roof elements give a sense of varying scale that is very appropriate for this location on the street. 2D emphasizes, again, quote, "Human scale should be achieved at ground level and along street frontages through the use of such elements as windows, doors, transoms, sidelights, columns, awnings, stoops, bulkheads, and areaways." Again, these are all things that I've already talked about and that you can clearly see have been integrated into the design. And finally, 2E notes that the actual and perceived heights of buildings is important. By providing building setbacks for new buildings at the cornice line of established buildings, taller buildings can better fit into the neighborhood. It's a specific recommendation to step back a building in reference to existing building heights as one means of allowing the existing dominance of the cornice line to continue to dominate the street. Taken collectively, this proposed design is wholly in keeping with both the general and specific design guidelines set forth in the ordinance. Remembering that the ordinance intentionally desires, through the establishment of 2.5 FAR and minimal side yard setbacks and rear yard setbacks, it intentionally desires to create more intense development, which is exactly what this is. It's a more intense development of apartments, but in doing so, it is responded with all of these guidelines in order to put forth an architecture that fits in. And that's, Tom, unless I missed something, I think that's the end of my testimony.
I have no further questions for Mr. Shaw. The board wishes to correct.
Do any members of the board or our professionals have any questions at this time? Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, I will call Mr. Edward Logan for testimony.
do you want this handled with regard to the easel?
Yeah, I guess maybe bringing it up there a little closer.
Can you set that? All right.
Just change the. As you're using the exhibits, perhaps you can lift them and turn them to the board as well, so both can see. Actually, leave it like that.
Okay.
I guess Mr. Bogan needs to be sworn.
Mr. Bogan, raise your right hand, state your name, spell your last name for me, please.
Edward Bogan, B-O-G-A-N.
And do you swear to tell the truth in this matter?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Bogan, you are a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
And in that capacity, you are familiar with the civil engineering components and proposals with respect to the application before the board on the Mine Street application?
Yes, I am.
Could you give the board then the benefit of your professional qualifications and experience?
I have a bachelor's degree from Newark College of Engineering. Now,
Microphone.
Yeah, go ahead, use the microphone.
I have a bachelor's degree in Newark in civil engineering from Newark College of Engineering, 1969. I have a master's degree in city and regional planning from the Gusflix School of Rutgers University. I'm licensed in the state of New Jersey and the state of Pennsylvania as a professional engineer, licensed in the state of New Jersey as a professional planner. I'm a certified municipal engineer. I started my career in 1969, worked 5 years with the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey. I left there to become the municipal engineer for the Township of Scotch Plains, where I worked there for 6 years. After that, I was involved in private practice, doing land development, site design, zoning, planning research, site evaluation, hydrology, hydraulics, stormwater management, detention design, drainage design, septic design, sanitary design, and have been involved with Mr. Broder and construction management for at least the past 10 years.
I would offer Mr. Bogan as a qualified professional civil engineer to provide testimony of civil engineering in the application.
He's accepted by this board.
Thank you.
Mr. Bogan, then if you could, I'm going to just ask you to go through generally the basics of the civil engineering aspects of the plan, as we all like to know about the water and the sewer and all the other civil aspects.
All those exciting things.
Yeah.
Well, this is the existing plan. As was pointed out earlier.
Excuse me, we should mark that, I think it's...
A9.
Site plan?
This is actually the existing conditions plan.
What sheet is that, Mr. Bowden?
Sheet 2 of 12. So the existing conditions plan is really to illustrate the location of the 3 existing structures, the pavement location, and the juxtaposition of those buildings on the property. Property is 130 feet wide and over 200 feet deep. And as was pointed out earlier, it meets the requirements of the zone, the AT zone. I'll get into that in a moment. So the site's located on Mine Street. Mine Street's a 36-foot wide road. About 150 feet to the south is Union Street, located, it tees into the Mine Street location. And Union Street, as you know, is Fraternity Row. It's been undergoing a redevelopment over the years. The topography on the site currently as it exists tends to move in a northerly direction towards College Avenue. And what I wanted to point out was that the Area 2 zone and how this particular application complies. And I wanted to go through the various zone requirements so that you have an understanding of how each and every one of these zone requirements are met by the application. For example, the minimum lot area is 15,000 square feet. This application is 21,000 square feet plus. The minimum lot width is 100 feet. This application is 130 feet. The minimum lot depth is 100 feet. This is 168 feet. The minimum front yard is 10 feet, and this is 10 feet. The minimum side yard requirement is 5 feet. This application is 5 feet. The minimum rear yard is 10 feet, and the rear yard here is slightly over 10 feet. The maximum building height is 40 feet permitted in the zone. The building height for the subject application is 39.6 feet. In the ordinance is a definition and a formula as to how building height is determined and defined. And going through that mathematical exercise, the building height is conforming. The maximum building cover, as Mr. Schock pointed out earlier, the zone requirement allows up to a 90% building coverage. What's being proposed here is a 65.6% building coverage. And then the maximum floor area ratio is 2.5 to 1, and we are providing a floor area ratio that's 2.4 to 1. Several other issues with regard to the site. The project is proposing to compensate for additional runoff coming off of the property by doing several different things. One, we are incorporating an on-site detention system that complies with state of New Jersey regulations with regard to stormwater management, and also complies with the city of New Brunswick's city requirements with regard to how stormwater is handled. And what will occur here is that there will be an underground system designed along the front of the building and then discharged into a stormwater system located on Mine Street. The applicant will be replacing the stormwater system from this property down 300 feet or so to College Avenue and then reconnecting to the system there. The pipes there are undersized and not in such great condition, so they're going to be replaced. While we're on utilities, there has been a series of tests done with regard to the water system. And while there have been varying results over the past 6 to 8 months, it has been concluded that the section in front of this application and then all the way down to College Avenue would be replaced. I think it's an undersized 6-inch line. It's going to be replaced by an 8-inch line at the expense of the applicant. In addition to that, as part of the requirements of the city of New Brunswick, with any new development, the sewer system that we discharge into out on Mine Street will have to be televised, inspected, and then, if necessary, repaired where necessary, in order that the system that, at least with regard to the frontage of the property and then Mine Street down to College Avenue, would be adequately addressed. There was some talk about, in the planner's report, about the need for foundation plantings around the perimeter of the building. And one of the issues that we had a concern with was that the foundation plantings along the rear and along the southerly side of the building are butting against fenced-in areas and would create a difficulty in terms of maintenance around the back of the building. It's also an area that's remote, not a place where the landscaping would have the value that it should have with regard to the attractiveness of the site. We focused our landscaping on the front. And we focus the landscaping on the courtyard area where the applicant is providing a common open space for the residents of the building.
Just to clarify that, Ed, that we are requesting a waiver with respect to the foundation plantings related to those specific areas.
That's correct. That's correct. Mr. Schock also pointed out about how the trash is going to be handled in the building, and it is fairly unique in that there's going to be a chute system. Everyone on each floor takes their trash and dumps it in a chute, down into a compactor, and then periodically this is pulled out, and then it's carted away by a trucking service. What we've provided here is a sufficient area for the truck to pull in, pull next to the site, and be able to pick up the trash. The actual drop curb opening here along the roadway is 34 feet. It's 24 feet for the driveway, and then 10 feet for access into the trash room. So that would provide sufficient area for a truck to pull in and load up. There's two levels here. This is the first floor level.
Mark this exhibit and identify.
This is going to be called the site plan. And it's,
Mr. Hogan, that's not different than the packet that was submitted to the,
I don't believe it was, no.
just identified by sheet number, you won't need to mark that.
Sheet 3 of 12. The image on the left identifies the first floor area. It shows the 24-foot wide driveway that enters the site. And then obviously it goes under the first floor and then circulates in the basement. It also shows the two entrances in the front of the building. There's one on the side, there's one on the rear for access into the building. There was also a question about the 24-foot wide driveway width. It's a waiver requirement. The driveway width requirement is typically 30 to 36 feet. We have been doing these for well over 10 years. The residential nature of the buildings and the need for parking out on the street don't dictate a 36 wide driveway to get into a residential site. And in fact, the 10 or 12 that we've done over the years, we've never had a driveway wider than 24 feet. Because the only traffic access into this lower area are typically cars. There's no deliveries made down below. It's simply for the residents and occasional visitors. The lower area has a parking space length of 18 feet, parking space width of 9 feet, which is typical. It's not made or reduced in size in order to get more parking spaces down there. That's the size that the vehicles demand. That's what the ordinance requires. The aisles between the parking spaces is 24 feet. That would be the same dimension that you would have if it was above grade parking. The only difference is that we have 43 spaces here, and the ordinance requires 96. The ceiling height in here, by the way, is also 8 foot 2 inches or greater. We have handicap spaces down there, and vans have to access the site. So that we would have ceiling heights that would vary from 8.2 feet to maybe 9.5 feet. Go ahead.
I believe there's also the engineering memo that was provided by Mr. Golden.
Mr. Golden provided a memo back in August. We've talked to him, and we've also indicated that there's nothing on the report that we can address. so that at some point in time when these plans are being revised, we'll incorporate his comments into those drawings.
Okay, so everything with regard to that memo can be complied.
Yes.
I have no further questions for Mr. Bogan.
Do any board members or any of our professionals have any questions at this time?
How is groundwater going to be handled again, runoff?
There's a detention basin system located in front of the property.
And that would be what, the roof would drain down into a dry well or a,
Well, it's not a dry well.
A sump?
It's an impoundment.
okay.
It's going to pick up, and it's designed for the 100-year storm. It's going to pick up all the roof water coming off the site. It's going to hold it here and then slowly release it into the storm sewer system.
It's not an exposed detention base or anything like that, it's a subterranean type of?
Yes,
Okay.
subterranean.
Madam Chair, just a follow-up question for Mr. Bogan. You'll be able to submit some sort of drawing showing that the trash removal vehicle will be able to make the turn onto, to maneuver, I guess, perpendicular to the building on Mine Street to access that trash door, service it, and then be able to pull out when Mine Street's fully parked?
Probably not. What we provided is a 34-foot wide area for the truck to pull in. Typically, they are there at off-peak hours, and usually traffic is not an issue. This is a 34-foot wide area. It occupies the area that is along the same line as the parked cars. So it's a 34 by 10-foot area that the truck would be able to pull in. That's without crossing into the sidewalk area. So that if the truck is of that size, it shouldn't be an issue. If it's slightly larger, it's going to have to be something that's handled off hours. But that's fairly typical of how trash is picked up in that area.
Any other questions for Mr. Bogan?
Yes, I don't think he's finished.
Madam Chair, just my concern is that the trash vehicle is going to be able to physically get to that trash door, pull up to it and service it, however it's going to service without blocking traffic on Mine Street. Whether it happens middle of the day, early in the morning, late at night, whatever, under any circumstances.
The truck doesn't pull it to the door. The container's wheeled out.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that's important testimony here then.
Could you restate that?
Yeah,
Mr.
can
Bogan?
you clarify that?
The container, the truck doesn't pull right up to the door. The container is wheeled out and then picked up that way.
So the trash vehicle can be parallel at Mine Street. It doesn't need to pull perpendicular to the
Right.
to the building to
Right.
sort of do a lift and
Right.
maneuver. Oh, okay. Okay. And it's your opinion that sort of maneuver is adequate to service the amount of trash that the building will generate?
I believe that, actually, that is probably better than most.
Okay.
You go right along Union Street or Hamilton Street, the driveways are fairly narrow, and there's not much room there to pick up trash. But in the number of times I've been there, it's the trash is picked up during off-peak hours for those types of operations.
Very good. Thank you.
Ms. Zappa, you have a question? There are actually two entrances to the building, right besides the seminary housing.
There's two in the front,
And there's one on the back.
there's one on the side, and then there's one on the back. The one on the back goes all the way down to the lower level, and then back up.
So the one on the back, anybody who's moving in will be able to, I guess that's
Your question?
which door will be used to residents to move in?
Move in. Over here. Oh,
The main door?
Excuse me, if I could, the architect probably is better to be able to answer that
Oh,
question,
okay,
so I'm
sorry.
going to ask Mr. Shock to answer your question.
In terms of entering the building, the entrances are in the front of the building. The stair tower to the rear and the stair tower to the side are your emergency egress stairs. And those are really controlled points. Those are not entrance points to the building. People aren't going to be going around the back to get into the building. That is a path of egress. So in the event of an emergency, you're in the stair, you come down, you go out When the door closes, that door will not be able to be reopened by the tenant. They'll have to go around and re-enter the building through the controlled entrance system. So those are emergency exit on the side and the rear. The entrances are really the pedestrian ones on the front.
Okay.
Does that answer?
So, it's, let's say somebody's with all the, you have, I mean, quite a few rooms. So if somebody's moving in, is there like alternate entrance to the other?
Well, the moving in happens through the primary lobby and typically uses the elevator, and the elevator is in the front corner of the building.
Oh, okay.
That is what really serves for your movement and your daily vertical circulation through the building.
Any other questions for either?
No, none this time.
Okay. At this time, I will call Mr. Charles Olivo for testimony.
It's already 10 o'clock. How long is the meeting going to go?
I said before, there would be no new testimony after 10:30.
Will there still be time for public comment through after this presentation?
If there hasn't been time, then it will be heard at the next meeting.
Mr. Olivo, if you could raise your right hand, state your name, and spell your last name, please.
Certainly. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Charles Olivo, O-L-I-V as in Victor O.
Do you swear to hold true in this matter?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Olivo, you are a licensed professional engineer of the state of New Jersey, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And you have practiced in both civil engineering and a concentration on traffic engineering too, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And in that capacity, you provided a traffic and parking analysis with respect to the project that's before the board this evening?
Yes, I have.
And you're familiar with the overall plan, is that right?
Yes, I am.
If you could then please give the board the benefit of your professional qualifications and experience.
Certainly, I have a Bachelor of Science in the field of civil engineering from the University of Notre Dame. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. I also hold licensure throughout the East Coast from Maine to Florida. I'm also a certified professional traffic operations engineer, certified by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. I've been qualified before 70 municipalities, over 70 municipalities I believe at this time, in 4 states. And I also served as a municipal traffic review engineer for several municipalities throughout New Jersey. I've served as a consultant to the New Jersey Department of Transportation, and I've worked on hundreds of traffic and parking assessments similar to the one that has been prepared for before this application.
And you have testified before boards in the Brunswick before too?
Yes, I have, correct.
I would offer Mr. Olivo as a qualified licensed professional.
The board assessment.
Thank you. Mr. Olivo, if you could, then please, I'm just going to ask you to give us an overview of the site, your engagement, and the charge that you had and how you went about doing your analysis. And I'd like you to then focus not only on the traffic circulation matters that you reviewed and the volumes associated with it, but then also with the parking variance.
Certainly, I think it might be most helpful to start with just a general context from a transportation infrastructure perspective of where we're located here at 17 Mine Street. So what I'll do is refer back to Exhibit A1, which is an aerial view. The site is located central to the exhibit. It's highlighted in a dashed yellow. And again, we're located along Mine Street, which is a local roadway, 1 lane in each direction. And it generally provides connection to College Avenue and Easton, certainly in this general vicinity. As a result of that, there is traffic that certainly flows along Mine Street for the purposes of utilizing the driveways along it, and then further mobility throughout the region to those roadways that I've mentioned for the board. In addition to that, there certainly is pedestrian infrastructure located along Mine Street, throughout the site frontage and in the general area. What I mean by that is there are sidewalks that provide connectivity to other uses within the area and amenities within the area. In addition to that, we are close, very close, I'll say, to the Theological Seminary. You're within about a 1-minute walk when you come out the front door and walk onto the sidewalk in this area generally to the north and east. You're about a 7-minute walk from the College Avenue campus, about 11 minutes to get down to George Street, where you can use any of the amenities along that area. And certainly, in terms of public transportation infrastructure, the city has an excellent source of multimodal surface transportation. What I mean by that is you have a train that's located in less than a 10-minute walk, NJ Transit Station, which is located generally to the south of this area, and you also have the confluence of a number of 800 series NJ Transit bus lines that are again located within less than a 10-minute walk. So in terms of the public transportation and the means by which the traveling public can get to and from various land uses, there are a number of options located within this area. And that is very important from a context perspective for the purposes of the parking need of this project, which I'll get into a little bit later as we talk about the proposed development plan of the site. As Mr. Bogan has spoken about, and the project architect has spoken about, there are a number of structures and buildings on the property today served by several full movement driveways along Mine Street. Those driveways would be consolidated to one full movement access point. The structures would be raised, and the project that is being proposed before the board this evening would be constructed. Previously, we came before the board with a project that was just under 60 units. We're now at 52 units. There was a 5-unit reduction as a result of coming back before the board. So we have 52 proposed units as part of the project site, with 43 parking stalls that are provided in the garage level on site for the purposes of parking for residents here. Now, in terms of the parking ratio that's being provided, and I'm just referring to the exhibit prepared by Grotto Engineering, this is sheet 3 of 12, which indicates the parking and loading area, which Mr. Bogan just spoke about. A resident has the ability to come in via Mine Street, travel into a full movement driveway, circulate via two-way circulation throughout the project site in terms of the parking being provided, with 43 parking stalls being provided. So again, we're at 0.83 parking stalls per unit. I've certainly been before the city with lesser parking supplies being provided, below 0.7 per unit of housing on the site. It is my opinion that based on the public infrastructure that is provided for the purposes of transportation, that the parking supply that would be provided as part of this project would be adequate to accommodate the demand associated with the parking of residents on the site. Now, in terms of just local information, the census data shows that New Brunswick residents, approximately 43% of New Brunswick residents, utilize a source of transportation that is not a single occupancy vehicle to travel to and from work. So what I mean by that is these residents utilize either the train, the bus, walk, bike, or carpool rather than using a passenger vehicle for the purposes of single occupancy. And I think that's very telling with regard to the type of constituency that you have here, the availability of public transportation, and the fact that it's efficient, which makes it certainly more attractive, which allows for, I think, the city to be very comfortable in granting a parking supply that is below the RSIS guidelines. And I'll get into what those guidelines mean, because in my opinion, those guidelines allow for great flexibility, to coin the phrase that was utilized by Mr. John Lego in a May 27, 2014 letter that speaks about utilizing the RSIS with regard to a project such as this. Given the proximity to these other types of infrastructure, public transportation infrastructure uses, and the fact that the amenities within the city of New Brunswick, and the fact that it's well planned, are easy to get to and convenient to get to, allows for us to look at a more relaxed parking standard for this project site. Now, in terms of the RSIS standards, the table 4.4 within RSIS states certain parking requirements or guidelines for the apartment mix that we have on this project site. If you were to look at those guidelines, the supply would be 96 parking stalls, where 43 are provided. Now, one of the very important parts of the RSIS, and in section 5:21-4.14, subsection C, speaks about alternative parking standards shall be applied in areas that exhibit some of the features which I just spoke about. Urban versus suburban, the availability and the convenience of public transportation. If you were to pick this project up and put it in a more suburban or rural town, I wouldn't be standing before the board suggesting that a 0.83 ratio would be appropriate. But given where we are, the proximity to the seminary, proximity to the train, the bus, other amenities that are within close distance here, that parking supply ratio, in my opinion, is more than adequate to accommodate the demand associated with this project. Now, in terms of the traffic generation, and there is some correlation between traffic and parking, but with regard to traffic generation associated with this project, we have completed a trip generation analysis. It is provided within the report that was submitted to the board, and what that speaks about is the number of trips that are projected to travel in and out of the subject lot and the full movement driveway located on Mine Street. And if you were to refer to the trip generation table within the report, it shows and exhibits less than 50 peak hour trips during the morning and the evening peak hour. Now, just to frame that and give you some sense of scale, the Department of Transportation and certainly other agencies look at an amount of 100 peak hour trips as being something that could significantly impact a roadway and the street network. So actually less than half of what that threshold or that rule of thumb is, which certainly gives me as an engineering expert some level of comfort in the fact and arriving at the conclusion that this project would not have a significant impact on the traffic operations within the area. The other point which I think is important to note is that if you were to build and provide the 96 RSIS guided amount of parking supply here, you would effectively be somewhat stating subliminarily, possibly, to the people that live within the building that car ownership is fine and that there are a number of parking stalls that they can certainly park their cars in and own vehicles. And as a result of that, many times what providing more parking than you need, what that does is it distorts the choice that a resident or a tenant has in being able to use public transportation for the purposes of their journey. And what I mean by that, if parking your car becomes so attractive and easy, then certainly that parking lot may fill up as a result. And what that would do is effectively increase the trip generation into and out of the site. Let's say if you were to have more levels of garage, the building would potentially be higher, more imposing to the street. And so parking can have an effect on planning and certainly the aesthetics of a building and transportation impacts as well. So I would submit to you that 43 parking stalls is not simply an adequate amount of parking for this project, but it also serves in the effect of bolstering the usage of public transportation, of walkability, of bike traffic. In addition to having parking stalls on the site, there would be bike storage and parking provided on the site as well. In addition to that, and Mr. Broder touched on this, which I think is an excellent means in terms of encouraging lesser parking need within urban areas such as this, is that there would be an enterprise parking stall provided on the site. I know that may not appear significant, but studies actually show that that type of shared vehicle has the effect of reducing car ownership significantly. And Mr. Hughes will speak more to that from a planning perspective, but can actually reduce the amount of cars utilized by tenants on the level of one shared car can reduce 15 owned and parked cars. So that is significant. It is certainly becoming something utilized more and recommended as part of planning standards. So I think to bring that into this development project certainly brings us in accordance with some more of the prevailing parking thought these days. Now, I will say that parking has become something of a very popular topic with regard to transportation and planning discussions within the Institute of Transportation Engineers Journal, the Urban Land Institute, AIA journals. Parking within urban areas, transit-oriented development areas, certainly has become the source of many studies. So there's a lot of data that's starting to come in and counts and sample information. The Institute of Transportation Engineers recently published a study that shows that residential projects within areas of high public transportation usage, such as this, can have parking ratios of less than 0.5 and actually function with high levels of occupancy for residential projects. So in terms of bringing this into the community in a way where it's less impactful, this certainly can have a very strong positive impact, in my opinion, with regard to parking. In addition to that, the city has a very well-planned system of implementing parking rules. You don't find that everywhere, and what the city has and implements here with their parking authority is actually an excellent way to control and look at parking being provided throughout the city limits. There are a number of consolidated parking garage areas which are available for monthly passes, which allows a resident to essentially unbundle their parking from what they rent in terms of a unit. And what I mean by that is, in the past, when buildings such as this were built, everyone paid for parking that they may not have used as part of not owning a car. Because building those structured parking stalls can be quite expensive, and as a result that's rolled into the rent, which as a result can make apartments and residential units less affordable, and certainly can make them less attractive in terms of livability. So from an overall transportation planning perspective, the ability to possibly rent a parking stall within parking garages that are managed by the parking authority, or the opportunity in terms of utilizing the parking stalls within this building, certainly provide options to the user and the person that lives within the space. Now in terms of the parking impacts of the site, we've utilized RSIS, and as I mentioned, that subsection within RSIS that very clearly states that there is great flexibility within the guidelines that are provided. We've looked at the Institute of Transportation Engineers and other guidelines, and in my opinion, the parking that's being provided on the site, again, as I mentioned, would be more than adequate to accommodate the demand because of where we're located, the proximity to the seminary, the proximity to the train station, and bus lines, as well as other amenities that are within walking distance. With regard to traffic, as I mentioned, I think the fact that we're providing parking that's adequate to accommodate the demand certainly has the opportunity to lessen traffic if we were providing the parking up to that guideline of 96 parking stalls. So from a balancing perspective, really looking at a development project from the perspective of architecture, planning, as well as transportation engineering, in my opinion, this project strikes an excellent balance and is in harmony with other projects in the area and certainly the public transportation infrastructure provided within the city of New Brunswick.
No further questions for Mr. Olivo, if the board wishes to direct.
Does anyone from the board have any questions?
I have a question. What's the maximum number of occupants in the unit?
I believe we're up to 66 bedrooms. The legal occupancy, I don't know.
If I'm not mistaken, I think the
I
number
see
is
you're
one-
looking at me.
Yeah, I think it's
Previously, the applicant had voluntarily offered to limit the occupancy of each unit to 2 persons per bedroom. In the previous version of the application, that was 140 persons, and I believe that would now calculate out to 132 potential occupants.
And just 2 items I'd like to add that I forgot about, but that question actually piqued my remembrance of this, is that the applicant is willing to waive the right to on-street parking as a result of this project. So certainly the property owners within the area have the right to on-street parking. The applicant on the record is willing to waive the right to having on-street parking stalls.
We're going to take public comment.
No, it's not public comment, it's just a question. I didn't.
No,
really
that will be
have the number.
after the applicant is finished presenting their case, then the public will be heard.
Well, they asked you a question and I want to
No,
answer.
during the public portion is when you can ask questions.
I don't ask questions. I'm the person that is for the CD, so if he says a number, he doesn't know. I need somebody to clarify a number and trying to understand his position. So if somebody asks a number, may I have a number, please?
132.
Thank you.
And one of the items that I'll add as part of working on many rental residential projects throughout New Jersey at this time is that the need for parking as developers and applicants build parking, structured parking to supply for projects such as this, the need for parking tends to be rather self-correcting. And what I mean by that is that when residents apply for leases or look to live in a building such as this, Mr. Broder and his team, having operated a number of these types of projects, know very clearly how many parking stalls, how many parking stalls essentially they have allocated to certain residents within the building. And as a result of that, as the buildings fill up, they're able to have a very open dialogue with those that are applying for the opportunity to come in and live in these buildings, with the fact that they may be filling up or close to capacity, and offer them other options, or simply they can find other residential projects throughout the city and in neighboring areas if they wish to own a car and they wish to park a car. So in terms of a lot of the prevailing thought that's being provided in terms of the industry and the experts in parking is that many times the developers and the applicants know best what serves their project. However, as I've stated, we've utilized all the guidelines here to look at the availability of parking here and if the demand will in fact meet, the supply will meet the demand of what's provided here. In my opinion, again, having to do with all of these different elements, it would.
Do any of the board members have any other questions?
Yes. Did you look at the current parking situation in this neighborhood?
I did.
In terms of availability?
I did. I looked at on-street parking, certainly drove through the area any number of times. We've been working on this project for the better part of the year, so I try to make it a point to drive by this area at certain times. On-street parking is certainly filled during what I'll call the peak hours of residential parking, which tends to be later in the evening and earlier in the morning. People park their cars to dwell overnight. But the fact that the developer is coming in and waiving his right to on-street parking and is providing adequate parking on the site, in my opinion, lends no impact to what's happening on the street today. In fact, in some ways, it has the opportunity to alleviate some of the experience on my street today.
Are there any other comments from the board or questions? Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I would call for our final witness, Mr. Keenan Hughes.
State your name and spell your last name for me, please.
Keenan Hughes, H-U-G-H-E-S.
And you swear to hold true to this matter?
I do.
Please.
Keenan, you are a licensed professional planner of the state of New Jersey, is that correct?
I am.
And in that capacity, you have been asked to, and I believe you have reviewed the planning aspects with respect to this application, which would include a review of the redevelopment plan, as well as to provide support for the requesting variance, that being the parking variance?
Yes.
Okay. Then could you give the board the benefit of your professional qualifications and experience?
Sure. I am a licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey, member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, and a lead accredited professional. I am also a principal of Phillips Price Greigel, a planning and real estate firm based in Hoboken, New Jersey. We represent municipal and private clients throughout the state on various planning and land use matters. I have a master's degree with a specialty in historic preservation from the planning school at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. And I have been accepted as an expert licensed professional planner by over 40 municipalities in the state, and that includes New Brunswick. I've been accepted as an expert for both boards, and I've worked on a series of developments, a few of which are similar to this in terms of the use.
I would offer Mr. Hughes as a qualified professional planner to provide expert testimony.
The board accepts them.
Mr. Hughes, if you could then please kind of start us with going through the scope of the work that you were asked to review, and then kind of go through your analysis, description of the property. I'd like you to, again, focus on those two areas, one of which is the redevelopment plan particulars, and of course we need you to provide your opinion with respect to the parking variances being requested.
Sure. Just in terms of scope of work, the main objective was to review the appropriateness of the variance requests from a planning perspective in accordance with municipal land use law. I did inspect the site and the surrounding area, reviewed all the application materials, architectural plans, engineering drawings, etc. I also reviewed all the relevant sections of the New Brunswick zoning ordinance and master plan, and also the College Avenue redevelopment plan. Just with respect to the subject property itself, I just want to provide a little planning context here. So this is a new exhibit, which I'll have to mark.
A10?
This is an exhibit prepared by my office entitled 17 Mine Street Planning Context. And really the goal here, and I think maybe I'll first show it to the board members as they may not be able to see it very well, was to illustrate some of the, number one, some of the transportation resources that are available within walking distance of the site, as Mr. Lewa described. Certainly the RU Student Center with its very extensive bus system available there is just a couple of blocks away from this particular property. Obviously it's just across the street from the, we're about a block away from the new Theological Seminary, also quite close to the College Avenue campus, walking distance to the New Brunswick train station, and also very close within a block to the planned development, the new student housing and public space, the outdoor living room as it's called, at the corner of Hamilton Street and College Avenue. Just with respect to Mine Street itself, you know, this is very much an area that's oriented to the university. If you look at the properties along Mine Street in between College Avenue and Easton Avenue, as we did, only 3 owner-occupied properties along Mine Street in that entire area. Actually, 23 are either owned or affiliated with Rutgers or occupied by students, and then 3 commercial uses. So as you can see, it's very representative of this area in terms of its orientation towards universities, seminary, and other institutional uses in the area. So with respect to this particular location, I think that all supports the fact that this is a very ideal location for this proposed use. As the board is well aware, in this area, particularly the 6th Ward, land is a very finite resource. This is a significant property at 20,000 square feet, and it's very much an important opportunity for the city to ensure that this is smartly redeveloped for a high-quality project. And I think that's certainly one of the reasons why the city took the step of adopting a redevelopment plan that includes this particular site. And that redevelopment plan, the College Avenue redevelopment plan, emphasizes the importance of efficiently using available space on or near the campus to develop new higher educational uses and uses supportive of the higher educational uses. And specifically for Area 2, in which this property sits, to encourage uses ancillary or in support of the college uses located in the neighborhood. So this use is permitted by the redevelopment plan. It's consistent with that vision for the area. And in accordance with the redevelopment plan, the applicant is proposing a privately owned and managed residential building with potentially a hybrid tenant base of seminary students and open market students that would, we believe, appeal to the student market. Now, the master plan reexamination report in 2012 encourages this type of development within the 6th Ward. On page 19 of that report, the planning board stated, many of the homes in the 5th and 6th Wards are relatively old, have not been well maintained, and are not designed to meet modern needs, particularly when used as college housing. As a result, there's a mismatch between the housing infrastructure and housing needs. Modern, purpose-built student housing needs to be developed, and new or rehabilitated housing in areas close to jobs and transit in the 5th and 6th Wards are necessary. So again, this project is consistent with the planning board master plan vision for this particular area, at least as articulated in the reexamination report from 2012. Again, this building is 100% compliant with the bulk standards set forth in the redevelopment plan. The applicant is proposing bike parking and a car share vehicle on site. The only deviation here is with respect to parking spaces. And before I do get to the parking variance, I do just want to touch on briefly some of the design guidelines in the redevelopment plan. I think Mr. Schott gave a very extensive description of the ways in which this redesigned building relate to the vision as articulated in those design guidelines. But clearly the elements such as dormers, the mansard roof elements, bays, and some of the materials that are commonly found in the neighborhood directly respond and are consistent with the redevelopment plan emphasis on harmonious architecture with existing buildings and other substantial structures in the vicinity of the site. With respect to height, the redevelopment plan specifically encourages what we've implemented in this project, which is an upper story step back. And it's not nothing, it's over 20 feet above the third story in terms of the upper story step back. And then of course in terms of the massing, the variation of materials, the texture and depth of the facade, all of those things create visual interest and break up the massing of the building. Again, very consistent with the guidelines in the plan. So I think there's no question here that this particular project not only complies with the use and bulk standards of the plan, but is also very consistent with the design guidelines set forth in that document. And before I get to the parking variance, I do just want to touch on the issue of historic preservation because it was something that was introduced at the outset of this meeting. I have not had an opportunity to review the letter that was read into the record. My understanding is it's some preliminary opinion from the State Historic Preservation Office with respect to the potential eligibility of this area, although there's a lot of language in that letter based on what was read in the record about information that needs to be updated in terms of refining the boundaries. Here's what the board needs to know with respect to historic preservation and National Register listing. It actually provides no protection whatsoever for historic resources, for better or for worse, within the city of New Brunswick. The city controls zoning. If these, let's say a historic district was deemed eligible or was listed on the National Register, those regulations have absolutely no teeth whatsoever in the city of New Brunswick. So I want to make that very clear for the record. Now back to the parking variance. The redevelopment plan, due to the RSI standards for suburban residential development, requires 96 spaces per code. This is, as Mr. Levo stated, this is really a statewide uniform standard that applies to all residential developments across New Jersey, really without drawing meaningful distinctions between specific housing types. And certainly the fact that this housing would appeal to students is not addressed. So as planners, we often feel legally obligated to utilize RSI standards as a matter of state law. And I think in this case, at least back in the, I believe the March hearing, Glenn Patterson, in his capacity as Director of Planning, did state that the city felt that it really had no choice but to utilize RSI standards with respect to private housing development within the redevelopment area. So again, RSI does provide a great degree of flexibility. Section 521-4.14 does provide specific language listing factors including minimum number of parking spaces, or factors affecting minimum number of parking spaces including household characteristics, availability of mass transit, urban versus suburban location, and the availability of off-site parking resources. All of those factors come into play in this particular application. And in fact, the city did receive a letter from New Jersey DCA May 27, 2014, which clarified that the city has, quote, a great degree of flexibility to provide relief from RSI's parking standards based on a consideration of those factors. So we are requesting a parking variance. It will be presented and justified as a C2 variance in that the purposes of zoning will be advanced and benefits of deviating from the ordinance requirements outweigh any detriments. And I will also address the negative criteria with respect to substantial detriment to the public good and demonstrate that the grant of the variance can be made without substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the zone plan of the municipality. So Just briefly, background on the parking issue. I think the board is very well aware of this issue as it relates to student housing. An area that was originally developed for 1 and 2 family housing, now mostly occupied by students. There's simply not enough parking in the driveways of some of these older residences that were not intended for this use. The policy question, which I think the board has grappled with, is what constitutes a realistic parking requirement for projects such as this, which do have a component that are geared to the student market. And the challenge here is balancing the desire to accommodate a higher density of housing close to campus, because that makes sense given the walkable qualities of this campus environment, with the need to provide sufficient parking to support the use. Now, the master plan did address this issue in 2012, the reexamination report. The planning board discussed the need to create, quote, realistic parking ratios for student housing in areas of, quote, walkability and mass transit access, which is page 59 of that particular report. And the recommendation was essentially that if student housing is anticipated in areas of walkability and mass transit access, a ratio of 1 on-site space per unit and or 0.5 spaces per bedroom should be considered. So while we are slightly below the 1-to-1 standard on a per unit basis, 52 units, 43 spaces proposed, the project actually well exceeds the per bedroom ratio, in that 33 spaces would be required. We have 43 in the project. So it is clear to me that the proposed parking is consistent with the framework provided by the 2012 Master Plan Reexamination Report. Secondly, transit alternatives and some of the locational characteristics of this property. There are, as I stated at the outset, a number of potential destinations for residents within a 5 to 10 minute walk. College Avenue campus, the Student Center and Rutgers bus stop with access to over 10 bus lines, Theological Seminary, the New Jersey Transit bus stop at Easton Avenue, and in the near future, the new Hillel Center and the anticipated public space and new housing at the corner of Hamilton and College Avenue. Also, the parking authority now has enterprise car share at the Gateway parking deck, and of course, the New Brunswick train station is a short walk as well. It's also noted that there are potential bike lane and other pedestrian improvements planned for College Avenue as part of the redevelopment plan and other planning efforts, which will only enhance the walkable nature or walkable qualities, amenities in this particular area. So from a planning viewpoint, I think this area clearly has the assets and characteristics in place to support lower parking requirements than those required by RSIS. Third, car share. Aside from the availability of transit here, I think it's important to factor car share into the equation. It's very significant, and the fact that it will be available on-site, but also within the New Brunswick Parking Authority's gateway structure is significant. Both will be within range for use of the occupants of this building. And car share is really a textbook example of parking demand reduction strategy in practice. And so from a zoning standpoint, it's very common to actually reduce parking requirements to account for the anticipated reduction in demand for parking spaces induced by the shared vehicles. So just by way of example, in Montclair, our firm prepared a redevelopment plan for a large mixed-use project that allowed for a reduction of six parking spaces for every shared car provided on site. And those impacts are really more pronounced in a college campus environment. In fact, a study that was released in November 2013 was published in Transport Policy, which is a peer-reviewed academic journal, entitled Car Sharing in a University Setting, revealed a reduction of 15.3 personal vehicles for every car sharing vehicle provided in a campus environment. So clearly the net result from the addition of car sharing is a net less parking demand on this property and in the area. Also, what's highly unusual about this proposal is that Mr. Broder is actually taking the next step to pay annual membership dues for residents to participate in the car share program, which will only incentivize residents of this particular property to use that service and not bring a car to campus. So clearly the availability of that service will reduce demand on site. We also have the benefit of empirical evidence, particularly since the adoption of the Master Plan Reexamination Report in 2012. A number of projects that are operating successfully at less than 1-to-1 parking. Construction management has built and operates at least 4 projects with less than 1-to-1 parking. 66 Sickard, which has a parking ratio of 0.9. 6 Sickard, 0.88, 15 Union, 0.6, and 50 Union, 0.7. I was also the planner for 2 other projects approved in late 2012, and now under construction, 54 Ray Street, 0.9, and 12 Bartlett, which was 0.66 spaces per unit. So I think the bottom line is that the applicant knows, the professionals know, that 43 parking spaces will be adequate for this project because the applicant actually has experience operating projects with similar or lower ratios. Another piece of compelling data is the proposed parking at 100 Hamilton, which just opened for the fall semester. And according to the property manager for that project, out of the 31 units, the total demand for parking from residents was 22 spaces, which is a ratio of roughly 0.7. So we think the anticipated seminary student population and the adjacency to the campus certainly supports a ratio of 0.83 as proposed. It's more than adequate. Finally, just in response to some concerns raised from really more of a practical operational consideration, again, this project will not be requesting any parking permits from the city. The applicant is relinquishing all rights to permits. Therefore, no quantifiable detrimental impact on neighborhood parking. If anything, the project will be taking more cars off the street. This project is actually building off-site parking, where you look at most of the student housing uses in the 5th and 6th wards simply either don't have parking or have insufficient parking to support student housing use. A major benefit of this type of project is also that cruising for parking is eliminated. Tenants come directly on site to their spaces. There's no cruising the neighborhood around Mine Street in the vicinity looking for parking spaces. So if parking is full and a potential tenant has a car, they can either find somewhere else to rent, find another housing opportunity, or they could pay monthly parking at the Wellness Center deck, seek daily parking, utilize car share, or utilize transportation in the area. So finally, just in reference to the benefits in accordance with the C2 justification, again, the main benefits here would be less traffic, and that we have fewer cars going in and out of the building than if we had to build 96 spaces in accordance with the RSI standard. We ultimately get a better design building, and it really furthers a walkable, not auto-centric environment close to the Theological Seminary and the College Avenue campus. The grant of the variance would promote Purpose A of the Municipal Land Use Law, because promoting transit alternatives and reducing traffic in a walkable campus environment certainly promotes the public health, safety, and general welfare of the community. Purpose E of the Municipal Land Use Law, in that the grant of the variance allows for an appropriate density of housing oriented to seminary and university students that will contribute to the well-being of the community by furthering the walkable nature of the campus area. Purpose G, in that it provides sufficient space in an appropriate location adjacent to the campus and the Theological Seminary for student-oriented and seminary housing. And finally, Purpose H, in that we're reducing the cruising for parking phenomenon in the 6th Ward and encouraging less car usage in a walkable area by developing housing near campus and near transit options. So the bottom line is that we have adequate parking for those who absolutely must need a car on a daily basis. But from a policy standpoint, overparking the project would really run counter to the city's vision for the College Avenue area. And in that regard, if you support decreasing cruising for traffic in the 6th Ward, if you support reducing demand for on-street parking, and encouraging more walking in this area, which is very suitable, then you should support projects such as this, which actually provide off-street parking, provide an adequate amount, and encourage transportation uses. Finally, with the negative criteria of public good, again, street parking is permit control. This project is not taking any parking permits to support the use. It will actually result in less movements in and out of the building and less traffic on Mine Street than if we had to comply with RSI standards. And the only possible outcome, I think, from an impact perspective would be increased demand for car sharing or daily long-term parking at the parking authority's facilities, which would only be a benefit to the city. So we're basically discouraging the unnecessary overutilization of cars in a location that has plenty of transit alternatives. So in that sense, there's absolutely no substantial detriments to the public good. Finally, in reference to the zone plan, the redevelopment plan was adopted relatively recently in 2012 and provides requirements specific to this area too. However, as I noted, we do have evidence since 2012 that parking at less than 1-to-1 does work, and these projects occurred after the plan was adopted in 2012, so it is understandable that 1-to-1 would have been used as a rule of thumb at that time. And again, the availability of car share on site and within the parking authority's facilities is an amenity that actually wasn't anticipated or wasn't available at the time the redevelopment plan was created. And also, just like to remind the board that this project is below the 0.5 spaces per bedroom ratio that was recommended in the 2012 Master Plan Reexamination Report. It is very consistent with the vision for a walkable, pedestrian-oriented atmosphere within the College Avenue area. For all of those reasons, there certainly is not a substantial impairment of the zone plan as a result of the grant of this variance. So, in conclusion, all of the elements referenced in the RSIS rules that would support a reduced requirement are present. Availability of mass transit, household characteristics, urban-suburban location, and available off-site parking resources. This is really a textbook example from a professional planning perspective of an instance where flexibility from RSIS requirements is appropriate. And meanwhile, we are providing more than 0.5 spaces per bedroom, which was recommended in the 2012 Master Plan Reexamination Report. So the reduction of the units and the addition of car sharing, which is very innovative for this type of private development, certainly enhance the planning justifications for the variance request. The benefits clearly outweigh the detriments, and this variance can be granted in accordance with the C2 justification.
I have no further questions to Mr. Hughes, if the board wishes to direct any.
Due to the nature of the time, do we want to pick up with questions at the next meeting, or do you want questions now, since we weren't going to do testimony after 10:30? Do you? Is that?
That's up to the board.
Perhaps the question is, does the board have any questions? And if the board doesn't have any questions, we are concluded with our presentation.
Does the board have any questions?
No, I don't have.
No questions.
That does conclude our presentation of the application.
Public portion is going to be held next meeting.
Yeah, if the board wants to do that, that can be continued, as you said earlier, Madam Chair. We're not going to take any new testimony after 10:30, and it is approximately 10:45, 10:47 now. The next meeting of the board is scheduled for the third Tuesday of November because of Veterans Day being on our regular meeting day of the 11th. Is it 23rd? I have the right date?
Yes.
23rd.
No, it's
November the 18th. So we've made arrangements to also have this room available, so we can come back here to this facility to accommodate the public that wants to come out and hear that, if that's what the board would like to do, and continue that next month.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn the meeting for tonight and pick up where we left off on the next meeting, November the 18th.
Second.
Madam Chair, I assume since the location, time, and place has been identified, there's no further need for notice
Just to clarify, the meeting will be held here at 75 Buyer Street, the Freeholders Meeting Room, at 7:30 p.m. on the third Tuesday of November 18th. We'll pick it up then.
And to confirm that I do not need to renotice.
Yes. No additional notice.
All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Are we going to keep your side the same amount of time next time?